The Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass. Where we make it happen, grab your seat, let's have a blast. At the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Journey podcast. Today I have Belinda Clemmensen with me. Hello, Belinda. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Now, Belinda tells me that she's sitting in the woods 3 hours north of Toronto. That just sounds idyllic. Belinda,
It has its ups and downs.
Okay. Have you always lived there?
I have not, but I've always, for most of my life, I've lived rurally. I grew up in a rural setting as well. And I think it just got into me from a young age, that idea of having that quiet.
Yeah.
I love visiting cities. I don't think I could live in a city.
Yeah, no, fair comment. Now, you've written a book, and I love the title of the book, and I'm going to get this absolutely spot on. Women, Leadership, and Saving the World. Where did the title come from, first of all?
Well, I didn't want that title. I'm a fairly sort of private person, and I wanted a less sort of bold title, to be honest. That's what, as I was writing the book, it was very vulnerable thing to do. I don't know for any of your listeners, or if you've written a book, you're sort of putting yourself out there in a way that's quite public, even if you don't have a huge readership.
Yeah.
And so I was trying for a title that might be like, a little softer or a little less bold. And then this title just came. And so I couldn't avoid the boldness of the title. And truly it is a firm belief, and it's backed up by the research that's in the book. And the research that's coming out more and more every day is just showing that, if we don't start to get diversity, and in particular gender diversity, into our leadership roles, we're just going to keep heading on the course that we're heading. And it's, there's so much opportunity here to turn things around and to be more just, more equitable, take better care of people and the planet. And I think women in leadership is just such an important lever to do that.
I would agree. I was at a conference last week, a family business conference, and one of the stats that was read out that family businesses are more successful, more profitable, and grow better when the daughter takes over the reins of the business. And I was like, oh, okay. And again, it was an academic conference, so it was backed up by stats and research, and they went, you can't argue with the facts. So fascinating. Okay, so what was the point in your sort of working life, professional and personal life, that led to this desire to get these words on the page?
Yeah, so I've been an entrepreneur my entire career. From the time I graduated from my undergrad, I started working for myself. My dad was an entrepreneur, so I think it just was in me, this idea that that's what you did. I did work for somebody else for 1 year of my career, and through that time just reinforced that I actually need to be an entrepreneur. I'm not a good employee. But my business was focused around leadership development. So that was the space I was working in. I was, helping organizations and corporations develop their leaders. And at a certain point, that started to feel really empty to me, because I felt like I was developing leaders to lead something that I wasn't really sure I believed in.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So whether that was, profit above all else, whether that was, speaking about values, but then not behaving according to values, whether that was the fact that I could really see that there was inequities at play, whether they're gender inequities or other inequities. And so I just felt like I was reinforcing a system that I fundamentally didn't believe in. And so that led to a bit of a crisis of consciousness for me, where I knew that wasn't it anymore, but I didn't know what was.
Right.
Eventually, that brought me around to sort of going back to my feminist roots and saying, like, if I do want to support leaders, what kind of leadership do I want to support? And when I started digging into the research, and this is like when I was pushing 50, and I think a lot of us have these moments, right? Whether that's when you're turning 50 or turning 60 or turning 40 or whatever it is. But, I was looking at this saying, like, what do I want to do with the career that I've built over my whole life, knowing that I only have X number of years of work left to do? What do I want to do with that time? And the research was showing me that we actually haven't moved the needle nearly enough on gender equity and leadership. We're making very small incremental changes. They're in the right direction, but they're just like too little, too late. And so that sort of pushed me into the women's leadership development space. And I've been doing that for about 5-6 years. And then I kept having this experience where I would go and talk to people about the research and the data and the fact that, for example, women just hit 10% of CEOs of Fortune 500s this year, 2023.
Really?
10%.
It's
And so
nothing.
people were telling, it's crazy, right? People were always
Nothing.
telling this sort of story of like, oh, well, we're doing so well on equity. Women are come so far. And I'm like, yes. And there's this bigger context piece that's just not a lot of people had been grasping. And so I realized that, I really needed to share this information and share my perspective on it that I had learned from really immersing myself in this work and this research for the past, whatever it's been now, like probably 7-8 years.
Wow. So it's a labor of love. And I relate to that hitting 50. For me, it was 48 with 50 on the horizon. And it coincided with my 2 older children leaving home. I have 3, so still have one at home. And finally having the headspace, and the line in the first chapter of your book that resonated the most with me was cooking another damn evening meal.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, I am so over cooking the evening meal. I do it. We get HelloFresh, which is one of those recipe boxes, so I don't have to think about it. And I think a lot of men don't realize that we get up in the morning and we're already planning the morning for the kids, if you have kids, the day for the kids, the evening for the family, the activities for the family, any appointments, any notes, any payments. And we're also planning our work at the same time. We're also thinking about if the washing's on or needs to go out, or the tumble dryer, or the dog needs to go to the vet, or, we just have so much more on our plates.
Yeah.
And so that if I have to cook one more damn dinner, it's like, yep, that's me.
It's so many of us. And I mean, the reality is that globally women do 2/3 more unpaid and caregiving labor than men do.
Yeah.
It's a little different country by country, but
Yeah.
I think that holds, And, we cannot talk about women in the workplace without talking about women's lives holistically.
Yeah.
Because as you said, all of those things, the list that you could rhyme off in 5 seconds of all the things that occupy your mind, your time, your energy, have an impact on your ability to participate in the workforce and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So this old notion, this sort of outdated notion that there's a hard line between work life and the rest of life, it's never held true for women. Maybe it never held true for men, but they were better able to uphold the illusion because they had partners who were doing this work at home, whether those partners were spouses or family members or paid care work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, way back, centuries ago, we had lots of kids, didn't we? So, women had help from usually the daughters in the household to look after the younger kids. So that definitely helped. And somebody said to me on LinkedIn the other week, this, working women, it used to be that women could stay at home and not work. Well, I said, that's not true. Women have always worked from home in cottage industries. They've taken in sewing, washing, cleaning. It's just not been seen. And I think now women are seen working.
Yes.
And yeah, you're right. Unless you've got a really great other half that's picking up all of the other stuff, you're still doing all of the other stuff.
Well, in this notion that women didn't used to work, I mean, also that's a very white upper middle class view of the world, right? Women have worked, women have had to work always. It's just this idea that there was a certain time and a certain class of women who didn't, but they were part of the dominant class at the time who sort of wrote the story of what is the world like for women. And it was a very narrow slice of what is the world like for women.
So, what are the most interesting pieces of information that you've unearthed that we can, because our podcast is listened to by business owners, entrepreneurs from all parts of the world. What gems have you got and what advice have you got for businesses as they grow?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think back to that point that we can't separate work and home for women. First of all, if you're feeling like that doesn't all fit together, you're right. It doesn't. It wasn't built to fit together because the world of work was not built for you if you're a
Yeah.
woman, and it wasn't built for your life. So I think it's really to be able to look at your own situation and say, okay, what are the pieces here that I can break the rules a little bit in so that it fits with my life? Because if the rules were never built for you, then it's okay for you to break them.
Yeah.
So if the world says this is how you run a business or this is how you are operating as an entrepreneur, yeah, for some people that might be true. Mostly, again, male, middle class men with support. Sure. But if we're coming in and we have more diversity that we're bringing to the table, those old models weren't built for us.
No.
I say, let's make new ones that work better. And the other, so it's the creativity piece, I think, right? To allow ourselves to be creative and just allow ourselves, when whomever, like the finance industry or venture capital industry says, oh no, you've got to be in this box. It's to push back and say, yeah, no, that's not how this works anymore. And I think the other piece is really to be able to look at our home and family lives and to stop trying to do it all, right? So whether that means redistributing labor within your household between you and other household members, men, kids, whatever it might be, I think that is a quiet revolution that needs to happen. We all need to redistribute. We need to make the invisible labor visible and redistribute it fairly in a household. And sometimes that also might mean bringing in paid help as well. Like if that's an option, right? If you have the privilege to be able to do that, to free yourself up from some of that work.
Yeah, I do not do ironing. I have not done ironing since I was about 23.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Yeah, and I think it's a disservice to our kids too to not teach them that care work and domestic work is part of life and it's part of everybody's job. Boys, girls, and everything in between. So to me, it's sort of like we do it for ourselves, but we're also doing it for the next generation so that we're not perpetuating these gender roles yet again.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, I've got girl, boy, girl. So my son did as much cooking and cleaning as my daughters have done. And it's just really important that we spread that load, definitely. And even my husband now cooks beyond a barbecue. I don't count a barbecue because he counts that as cooking. I don't count that as cooking.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes what's fun, I think, if you like, I think we can play with this a little bit to say, okay, let's just switch jobs for a week.
Yeah.
And so like, I'm quite happy like to sit out on my back deck with a beer and a barbecue. I'm like, yeah, this is a sweet role. I'll take this for a little while, instead of whatever was happening in the kitchen. So I think some of those things are really illuminating as well, like to flip roles for a week, or when we're talking about expectations that we have for men or for women, like if we substitute the words, then sometimes it just sounds so absurd.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
So it's just a good exercise to just sort of play around and break free of some of these gender boxes that we're in, both for women and for men.
Yeah, because I also like the intro about actually you encouraging men and boys to read the book, because you also talk about how they're boxed in to their
Yeah.
stereotypes. I think Gen Z may be bucking that trend. Do you see
Yeah.
do you see that?
I do, because I think, they're blowing up the idea of gender as binary, which
Uh-huh.
I think is so important, right? Because that's just a social construct. And it's sort of like, once you see it as a social construct, you think, oh yeah, it's ridiculous. So, this idea, I think that there's so much more fluidity, or thinking about gender as socialized behaviors or expectations, as opposed to being completely fixed based on sex, you know? And I don't know about you, but like I have a Gen Z in my household,
Yeah.
and like the idea of non-binary, or the idea of gender fluidity, or any of those things, that's like no big deal, in their minds, which I think is brilliant. So it's older generations, I think, that are struggling more with letting go of, like, well, this is the way things are. This is the way it's meant to be somehow. And the younger generations, as is always their job, I think, are pushing on those notions and saying, well, why does it have to be that way?
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I have a 14-year-old in the household, definitely. So she ticks the Gen Z box without a doubt. I think, without getting into too deep a conversation about that, I think there are challenges around that, because I get the gender fluidity thing, but there are sex differences that are
For sure.
absolutely palpable and identifiable. So I think their challenge is to navigate inclusivity whilst respecting the differences of the different sexes. And I don't actually envy them that task, because that's tricky.
Well, I mean, what we're getting into here, I think, is this territory of both and.
Yeah,
So as humans, we prefer the really simple thinking about things, right? Like, it's
yeah,
either this or it's that.
yeah,
And I think what we're getting into now, which I agree makes it very complex, is
yeah,
this idea that both of the things you just said are true,
yeah,
right? And so now and this is I think part of the challenge of diversity in general, is that, when we really look at all of the different identities that any one person holds, right, based on gender, ethnicity, race, education level, language, like all of those things, body size, like all of these things create a unique identity for each
yeah,
person.
yeah.
And when we're talking, we would like things to be simpler, but when we're talking about diversity, it's not.
Yeah, my default position is diversity of thinking. I,
Mm-hmm.
in my own head, I find that easier to navigate and to encourage when I'm working with businesses, and even for members of our own team. Is I absolutely encourage diversity of thinking, and I don't care whose mouth that comes out of, what shape that human being is, or who they identify as. What I'm interested in is what goes on in here, and how they can look at things from very different angles, and that takes us all the way back to the creativity. And if only 10% of CEOs of the top Fortune companies are women, and 90%, I'm guessing, are white men generally. There
Pretty
may be,
much, pretty
yeah,
much.
some ethnic difference in ethnicity in there. That would indicate a broadly similar background, broadly similar education. And it doesn't matter to me that they're packaged as human beings, as white men. What matters to me is the lack of diversity of backgrounds and thinking and culture, as we've already said. And that's the bit that
Yeah.
we definitely need to challenge.
Yeah, and I think, we're at a stage now. I completely agree with that. I think that is the issue. I mean, besides the issue of fairness and justice, right, of access to these things and opportunities, but it is the issue that we're getting some homogeneous thinking likely, happening there or be based on that lived experience.
Yeah.
And we could try to train all that 90% to think differently, or I think easier solution, we could just have a more diverse group, making decisions and leading organizations. So that's kind of where I lean on that one.
I would agree. I think your solution is a great deal easier, definitely. So, okay, so let's get back to the flexibility in the workforce, or rather the creative thinking in the workforce. You're in Canada. Some companies in the UK experimenting with a 4-day week. Are you having that in Canada?
We're starting to experiment with that, which I think is so interesting and so positive. I think, of all of the tragic outcomes from the COVID pandemic, I think one of the good things is that it gave people pause to reassess their notions about the value of work in their lives versus the value of everything else in their lives. And so I think things like the movement to a 4-day work week, pushing back on some of those expectations that people be always working and always available are good outcomes. And I think they're taking us into interesting territory.
Yeah. I, I used to run a business way back before any of this came out, and I encouraged all my employees to go part-time if that's what they wanted to do. They had to work a minimum of 3 days a week, and they had to organize between themselves which days they took. No, not everybody took me up on it, which was absolutely fine. I found productivity went up and I found profitability went up, particularly with those individuals who were part-time. Their productivity remained the same and I was paying them less. It's very simple maths to work that out.
Yeah.
What holds businesses back, do you think, from taking those kind of steps where they can? Because not every business can do that, and we have to
Yeah.
acknowledge that.
Yeah. Some business models don't lend themselves to that kind of arrangement. I think one of the things that holds us back is uncertainty.
Okay.
So I think this is, as part of the change process is that we hold on to what's familiar because we think it's known, right? And so it's sort of like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So even though the current situation is flawed and not perfect, it's familiar. When we're going into new territory, chances are it's also going to be flawed and not perfect because
Yeah.
that's how things go.
Yeah.
But then we also add in the fact that it's uncertain. And so I think a lot of people are afraid to sort of make that leap into the territory of the unknown. I find it exciting and interesting if we could look at it as an experiment, if we could say, let's try this, let's be analytical and use our critical thinking as we go through it to try to understand what are the pros and cons, give it some time, do some analysis. For me, that stuff's fascinating.
Hmm.
But I think, perhaps as a lifelong entrepreneur, I've become comfortable with risk
Yeah.
because there's a lot of uncertainty in the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. That's true. So, what was the process of writing the book like for you?
Well, I knew, I mean, because I already have a very busy women's leadership development practice, I knew that there was no way, and I'm a working mom. There was no way that I could, lock myself in a cabin for 6 months and write a book. That's not how this was going to go. So I I gave myself some structure. I worked with a writing coach to get the book outline done in 3 months, and the book
Okay.
outline was critical for me. I needed structure. And then I took another maybe 3 or 4 months to actually then write the chapters. But I had the outline there to rely
Mm.
on. And for me, because I'm already working full time and running a household and doing all the things, I just did that in the early mornings.
Okay.
So another gift of getting older is I get up early. I feel like I'm becoming my nana. It's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
so, now I'm getting up early in the morning. So I'm using that time. I use that time to do my writing. But yeah, it was really helpful to have support. I definitely had support too on the publishing side, just to, editing and layout. And for me, there was no way I could have done that
Hmm.
on my own.
The product's excellent. And what doors has the book opened for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, it's opened a lot of really great conversations like this one. And some of those conversations are with people who are very like-minded, right? Who are sort of like seeing the world in a very similar way. Some of them are with people who don't.
Okay.
And so that's been fascinating for me too, is can we have respectful conversations when we disagree about this stuff?
Okay.
It would be very hard for me to say that anyone could convince me that equity is a bad thing, right?
Okay.
That unlikely to happen. I'm not going to come over to that side,
Yeah.
although I do get into those conversations. But how can we respectfully disagree about some of that stuff?
Ah, okay.
So that's
Hmm.
been fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think the other door that it's opened is just a lot of my organizational clients who were already working with us in our leadership development programs are now reading the book, and it's opening their perspective a little bit beyond their own companies,
Oh, good.
which is
Good.
really cool to see.
Yeah. That's great. Now, okay. It hadn't even occurred to me, Belinda, that somebody might not think that having more women at the top was a good thing. Tell me about that.
This is a big barrier actually, and it's a bit of the unspoken stuff, but I
Okay.
mean, there's still a lot of belief out there that actually men are better at leadership because
Okay.
we are so used to seeing them there.
Right.
So, even in the research there, it was show things like, something, I'm trying to pull the number from my mind. It's probably wrong, but it's in the ballpark, but it's something like 60% of respondents would say that they think a woman could be a CEO or a prime minister or president. So that means that there's 40% of people out there who believe that they can't or they
Uh,
shouldn't.
okay.
So
Okay.
that's, I think, a hurdle that we need to sort of lean into a little bit is
Mm,
how do we start to shift the belief systems that are based on a very long history
mm.
of belief and trust that men are the ones who are good at this stuff because
Uh,
that's who we've seen for so long.
right. Okay. Um, I find that bizarre. Um,
Agree?
particularly in the 21st century, in 2023, we're almost quarter of the way through. I find that utterly bizarre. I wonder, and I don't know whether you've come across this, I wonder whether it's because women tend to lead with different styles than men, and perhaps it's that different range of styles that women generally have more collaborative, and I know that comes up in the research as well, that women tend to be more collaborative. I certainly have that in my own experience. And perhaps that's not seen as a good quality in leadership. I don't know.
I think our view of what is leadership is evolving.
Okay.
I think you're right that there's this old view that leadership looks basically like the way men were trained to lead, right? Authoritarian, decisive, individualistic, competitive, those kinds of things. I do think there's a shift happening to starting to understand leadership as more collaborative, partnership based, empathetic,
Yeah.
but still decisive. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. And so, that being said, I think we're on the journey. I don't think we're at the end of the journey in terms
Mm.
of making that shift and happen what we think of as a leader. What does it look like? I mean, exercise that anyone can do is just Google, for example, in Canada, like Google premiers of all the provinces of Canada. They all look pretty much the same. Or, Google CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. They all look the same. So that's not just coincidence.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. And you quote Brené Brown too. I remember watching her first TED talk and being completely blown away. And I think her first one was on shame, if my
Yeah,
memory is
shame and
correct.
vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah. that I feel personally is a great trait of leadership is to demonstrate your vulnerability. And I guess that's not something that top, top 400, Fortune 100, or however many it is, company leaders demonstrate too often, which is traditionally quite a masculine type trait. When I think about male and female, I actually think about the Chinese yin yang symbol, the masculine and feminine energy, and I actually think it's more useful for us to talk about masculine and feminine energies.
Yeah.
Because you absolutely get brilliant leaders who are men who embrace what would, going back to that symbol, would be traditionally more feminine, perceived as feminine energies. But that symbol for me, because it's all contained in one and you have to have a bit of each, is
Yes.
if we could achieve that, perfect.
I agree. And I tend to refer to these things as masculinized or feminized
Okay.
traits and behaviors because they're also socially learned. So, I mean, some of them are inherent. As you said, it's back to that both end. Some of them are inherent in our biology, and a
Yeah.
lot of them are just learned or socialized. And so it's not that men can't be collaborative and empathetic or that women can't be assertive and decisive. It's that again, I think we're starting to break free of those really firm gender expectations that put us into those different boxes.
Yeah.
Now, I think the other thing we need to add to this conversation, though, is that the masculinized parts were overvalued, the feminized were undervalued.
Yeah.
And so that also needs correction here, is to say, and this is why, for example, caregiving work or domestic labor is largely unvalued and unpaid and unseen,
Yeah.
because it was feminized work.
Yeah.
And so that shift needs to happen too, where we're starting to equally value things like empathy and decisiveness, caregiving work and profit producing work.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
And it is an and, isn't it? It's not an either or. It's blending this together and as you rightly say, valuing all of it. Absolutely all of it, because in a crisis, you absolutely need command and control, decisive leadership. And when the crisis has passed, you can return to collaborative, more of a democratic style and affiliate style and all of that. Yeah. And leaders need to be able to flex, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We need the range. I think we need the range. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Is there another book in you, Belinda?
What I'm really curious about now, because my first book really focused on, women, sort of where we sit today, the progress made, the progress yet to be made, sort of some strategies for how to get there, and mindset shifts, I think, as well, for how to get there. I'd like to start working with men on the journey towards equity. And so I think this idea of, women will be at the forefront of this movement because we have the most to gain and the most to lose here. But I do think where we'll really hit a tipping point is where we get men and women working together towards breaking down some of these roles, expectations, inequities, etc. So I'm really curious to start interviewing or talking with men who are seeing the world this way too, and sort of what are they working on, and how are they using their voices and the power and privilege that they have to create more equitable workplaces and communities.
I think that's brilliant. I think it's absolutely essential. We have to do this together. We can't work in isolation. And I actually see it, hopefully, for many men as a relief for them. Because one of the stats in the UK is that suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 28. So it's just not working for them either at
It's
all,
not.
in the most horrific way.
Agreed.
So I think, I'm thinking, I'm sure you'd be pushing at an open door there where we can all navigate this complex world. And, we don't have to bear the burden of just earning the living for the family and supporting the family, or just the domestic thing. It's shared, and it's like you say, shared as equally as possible according to strengths, I think,
Yeah.
is the best way to describe it.
And we see this now with so many more men wanting to take parental leaves and wanting to be more actively involved in raising their children, right? And what a loss it must have been for all those men, when they were excluded from that, or where they were just expected to work and bring home the paycheck.
Yeah.
And not be involved. And maybe it felt like a relief. I don't know, like to not have to do that work, because raising kids is hard.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I see the emotional connection between, my partner and our son. And I think that's invaluable for both of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I see, certainly in the UK, many more dads pushing pushchairs during the week. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they would have been a rarity, much more common now. And it's fabulous because, like you say, they missed out on so much traditionally, if they were in the office, of seeing their kids grow up and making those connections. Yeah. Cool.
And I
Amazing.
think, the kinds of changes that women are pushing for in the workforce are good for everyone, right? So flexibility, right? Like women need it.
Yeah.
But it's good for everyone, right? That idea of flexibility, because then, if dad needs to knock off early to go and look after his aging parents or his 2-year-old or whatever, then it becomes normal. And I think if we can normalize these things for everyone, and the research would suggest too that, the benefits that come from gender diversity and representation and leadership are benefits for everyone, right?
Yeah.
It's like improved access to healthcare, better education, it's better for sustainability in the environment, more inclusive decisions. Like, there's no downside here other than change can be a hard process to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I could talk to you all day, Belinda. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Just let everybody know where they can find your book and what it's called again.
So it's called Women, Leadership, and Saving the World: Why Everything Gets Better When Women Lead. And you can find it on our website, womensleadershipintensive.ca, because we're Canadian. And then there's a book page on the website, and that'll give you everything you need to know, as well as there's a great reflection guide on that page that you can download just to sort of accompany your reading of the book. Ask yourself some questions, almost like a guided journal.
Great. Well, I'll put those details on the podcast so people will be able to click through and find them. That's amazing. Listen, best of luck with the book and your business, and keep banging that drum, Belinda.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
The Entrepreneurial Journey Podcast. We're talking business and building a culture that's kick-ass, where we make it happen. Grab your seat, let's have a blast at the Entrepreneurial Journey.